All right, welcome to all our viewers. Good afternoon if you're based in Australia. Good morning if you're in Israel. It's a very good night or late good night to you if you're from the US. My name is Ori Danieli. I'm the Executive Director at Technion Australia. For those of you who are not familiar with Technion, it's Israel's Institute of Technology and among the world's leading dedicated to science, technology, and engineering. In Australia specifically, we're part of a global network of about 25 associations with the mission to support the Technion in Israel by encouraging and fostering research collaboration and promoting philanthropic support for research, infrastructure, and scholarships. I want to begin by acknowledging our event partners today, the University of Technology in Sydney. We've got with us today Professor Michael Blumenstein, who's the Associate Dean and the moderator of today, and I'll introduce Michael properly later on. And our supporting partner today, the Israeli Embassy in Canberra, and we're particularly excited and honored to have Ambassador Mark Sofer with us, which we'll hear from shortly. 2020 will be remembered as a year where the term disruption got a whole new meaning to it. Even companies that are known as major disruptors have heavily been affected by COVID-19, think Uber, Airbnb, and so on. Size of your business, geographic location, or industry sector really doesn't matter. COVID-19 affected pretty much every business. So we're fortunate today to have two industry leaders, Technion alumnus Gabi Zodik, who will be representing a perspective from a major multinational, IBM in this case, and UTS alumnus Dr. Ashod Donikian will be representing the other side of the spectrum as an entrepreneur and founder of a startup in Silicon Valley. So Gabi and Ashod will both talk about, share insight about how their prospective businesses are adapting to what we're now getting used to as a new norm. Today's discussion is going to be interactive, and you're all encouraged to ask questions on the Q&A section of this Zoom or on the Facebook message box. But before we dive in, it is my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Mark Sofer, Israel's ambassadors to Australia, to formally welcome our guests and speakers. Mark is originally from London and has spent the past 4 decades with the Israeli Foreign Ministry, had diplomatic positions in Peru, Norway, and New York City, including ambassador roles in Ireland and India. In 2017, he was posted as the ambassador to Australia. Mark, thank you for your continued support, and over to you now.
Thank you very much indeed, Ori, and it's a good evening in San Francisco, good morning in Israel, and good afternoon here in Sydney. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I would say just really a few words because my pearls of wisdom pale into insignificance. Having dealt with inter alia Israeli-Australian relations for the past, I think, certainly the best part of 2 decades, there are clearly very many synergies between us, but none are more, I believe, greater than that of the human factor between Israel and Australia. That really is, I think, what sums up this relationship more than anything else. We have two developed societies, both of them trying to better their own populations, better each other, look further afield than just their own societies. And I think more than anything else, they're highly advanced, highly educated people with much mutual respect. And as such can do, but obviously must do more, to discuss ways of enhancing their own and each other's societies in the basis of cooperation and of collaboration. It's my honest feeling that the two institutions that we are dealing with now and the alumni of the great Technion, which of course I know very well indeed, we all do in Israel, it's a byword in the field of technology, innovation, forward-looking thinking, etc. And of course the UTS, which goes way beyond the boundaries of Sydney and Australia. The collaboration between the Technion and the UTS on the one hand, and its alumni, old boys, old girls, etc. This is really where we should all be heading. We're in a new world. We don't know where it's going. And yet, if we don't find the way to collaborate in greater depth between the companies, between the scientists, between the technological experts of the two major institutions of both countries, will be floundering indeed for many months and years to come. Our future indeed is predicated on such cybersecurity, technological advances, innovation, not just for us, as I said earlier, but really for societies of third parties around here in the Asia Pacific region, around us in the Middle Eastern region, and third parties as well, Africa, Latin America, the list goes on. So as I said, we're now in a COVID era. We don't know where to go from here. How do we tackle this new reality? I, just as a petty bureaucrat, we, the people, need you, the industry leaders, the experts from Technion and from the UTS to tell us how to move on from here. We don't know, but really and truly, we need you. So I wouldn't call this really a Humphrey Bogart, the start of a beautiful friendship, because we're already in this beautiful friendship. But really, what do we do next? And I think the world needs both of you. So thank you very much indeed. And I'm really looking forward to this webinar. It's crucial, I think, for each and every one of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I want to introduce our moderator for today, Professor Michael Blumenstein. Michael is the Associate Dean, Research Strategy and Management at UTS, at the Faculty of Engineering and IT. He was previously the head of the School of Software. And prior to that, he was with Griffith University in Queensland, where he has accumulated over a decade of experience in leadership roles, including Portfolio Dean of the Science Group and head of the School of ICT. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Ori. Really appreciate that. And I wanted to also thank the ambassador and for his comments and remarks. Very important indeed for us to be having this conversation. I'm very excited that we have such two top alumni, one from Technion, one from UTS, speaking here today. On behalf of UTS, I'd also like to thank Technion Australia for allowing us to partner in this event, which I think is going to be a very exciting conversation about not what we've been through in COVID, but more what the future holds. University of Technology Sydney is very much a university that looks to take what it does in its excellence in research and translates it to the real world, into industry applications, supporting the community, looking at public good, and trying to actually come up with solutions for society. So we're very much, as a university, engaged in this conversation. We've already contributed to providing state and federal government with things like data and decision-making capabilities to support them through this crisis during the COVID crisis. But now we're emerging from it. We now have the opportunity to really reinvent ourselves. And how can businesses reinvent themselves, and how can academics, researchers, government, and big companies such as IBM and Ash as well, how can we all together really have such great work that we can achieve in coming out of this scenario? So I was going to say that I really wanted to really thank everyone that's made this event possible, but I really would now like to turn to our to our two speakers here on the panel today, and I want to just give a very quick just introduction to them. Ori had already mentioned Gabi and Ashod as being two alumni. Gabi Zodik is the Director of Blockchain and IoT Platforms at the IBM Research Labs in Haifa in Israel, and he has a vision to extend and enhance the capabilities of blockchain. He's an outspoken evangelist on the challenges and opportunities in blockchain and the future of AI and IoT systems. Gabi has an MSc and a Bachelor of Science in Electrical Engineering from the Technion. So welcome, Gabi, to the conversation today. And Thanks. Our second speaker is Dr. Ashod Donikian. And Ash is the founder and CEO of Navisens, which is based in Silicon Valley in the United States. Ashod has worked on several projects specializing in sensors, autonomous vehicles, UAVs, and drones. He received his Bachelor of Engineering and PhD degrees from the University of Technology Sydney, and also he was awarded the 2019 UTS Alumni Award for Excellence from the Faculty of Engineering and Information Technology. So welcome, Ashod, as well to today's conversation.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and happy to be here.
So I might just kick off. The format we're going to have is very much conversational Q&A style, and we'll actually then, once we've had a few questions that I'll pose as the moderator, I'd also then like to open it up later on to the audience. So what I'd like to start with, I suppose, is something that's on the tip of everyone's mind. So COVID-19 has demonstrated that businesses which have been digitally enabled were able to thrive during the crisis, while the traditional ones struggled. Based on that premise, what are the ways that you have seen businesses in Israel and in Silicon Valley pivoting or adapting to be more commercially viable? Who'd like to start?
Sure, happy to go first. So I'll give, I guess, a perspective from how we see the industries, the companies and our customers from IBM point of view, and some of the things that we've done in IBM. First of all, I think the new priorities we see from customers, as you've mentioned, is that those who were digitally prepared were much more ready to go through this period. New requirements coming up from our customers, from our existing ones. So for instance, resiliency of their computing infrastructure became very high on their priority. If they were debating for a while about moving to cloud some applications, this certainly pushed much faster this adoption of cloud agility. The fact that having things on the cloud allows them to get that resiliency. I think Ambassador Mark mentioned cybersecurity as one of the collaboration areas. It's certainly high on the radar. When these things happen, there are always bad people in the world who try to penetrate systems, try to take advantage. They think that during these times, companies might be weaker. So security and cybersecurity are of high attention these days, much more than in every day. Supply chain resiliency became suddenly very, very important. Think about all of those hospitals or all of the healthcare providers. They need suddenly to acquire new equipment. How do they know who of the suppliers they can trust? What is really the actual supply chain capabilities? How much do they actually have in their inventory? Suddenly, all of the infrastructure which we have to automate and manage inventories or assess the quality of those suppliers became extremely important. There is no time to go and inquire about a supplier whether he adheres to all of the standards. You need to automate all of that. So you need to know that you can trust the supplier. And by the way, if one hospital in a region already did that work, let's make sure that we share that information about that supplier with all of the rest of the hospitals. Obviously, maybe, I'm not sure if the number one, but among the top is how to enable remote workforce became a very, very important priority. So those of us who work in the high tech, we know that we spent hours and hours and days over Zoom, WebEx. That's our life. We've been there for a decade and more. But for many other industries, this is new. Suddenly teachers in Israel need to learn to use Zoom and class of 30 kids. And of course, this is true in many other industries. But it's not just using Zoom. It's really using the collaboration tools in an effective manner. We can no longer meet, and we need to do complex architectures today or design something. So all of these things are becoming important, and technology can certainly help in many ways. We certainly see also that many professions change. I mean, if we look just simply at our sales force, they no longer can go and meet the customer face-to-face. They need to do that digitally, again, through the same means. So all of these things are things that we've seen. I can take another couple of minutes just to discuss some of the things we've done also within IBM. Okay, these are things that we've observed, and these are things that we prepared of what's our go-to-market and what are the needs in the market. But in addition to that, if I can say, I think I was amazed, and maybe I shouldn't be amazed, from the enthusiasm of everyone within IBM. IBM, as you guys know, is a pretty large company, more than 400,000 employees, of wanting to help, of coming up with ideas, technology ideas, of how to overcome COVID, how we can enable to return to work. And pretty quickly, we organized several task forces in IBM that collected these ideas, distilled and assessed them, and really put them together in meaningful offerings with a very short time to market. So everyone was engaged, whether it's development, research, offering managers. You've seen, some of you may have seen, we just announced a couple of days ago something called Watson Works. I'll mention that in a bit more details maybe later on, but it really puts together multiple technologies that can allow you to track employee, their health status, who they meet, which locations they are, what's your occupancy in the offices, managing the occupancy in offices. It brings together multiple capabilities we have, the new capabilities which we developed. Again, all of these to put in place so that we can try and come back to normal life. But I think at these times, certainly large companies, and I think you all mentioned, we need to come together, universities, large organizations doing research and innovation to cope with these pandemic, which is really non-trivial. So I think there is also a lot of things that we do for the community, but not necessarily as a business, initial business goal. You may have heard we put together the largest supercomputer in place with more than 400 petaflops of computing capabilities. These were supercomputers we built and were available to multiple organizations within the US. And we just put them together and we made them available to researchers to run simulations that otherwise might take weeks or even months. And now they in minutes and hours. Similarly, you know, you've seen that we have a platform for the weather company, which we acquired some years ago. We extended that not just to show the weather, which is interesting, of course, still, but how the pandemic is spread across the countries, with, of course, a lot of data around. And that jointly with Watson Assistant, which is now, I think, available in dozens of countries in the US, certainly, just helping people answering the basic questions with an assistant. So you can type in questions or ask questions and get help. I think we're also helping, I'll just give one example, other organizations or companies who try to do something good for humanity. Just one example, for instance, from the blockchain domain, a company called Mipasa. They pretty on realized that there is huge amounts of information available now. All the hospitals have done multiple experiments with medications that helped one patient or didn't help. And suddenly was tons of information available, but you never knew which information you can actually trust, where it originated from, and how to actually share that while preserving also the rights of the owners of the information. And that's really the challenging goal that Mipasa took upon itself. It built a solution on Hyperledger Fabric, which is an open source blockchain platform we are all contributing to. And we certainly joined them and we're helping them to build out this solution. Finally, I'll just say that it certainly impacts, of course, our research agenda moving forward, because there are longer term implications of how the future workplace would look like, what's the future of health, and so on and so forth. I might get into that in later, but let me pause here and give a shot the stage.
Thanks, Gabi. I really appreciate that. That's really good perspective, and we'll also, revisit some of those other elements about IBM in more detail. But just Ashod, coming from working in Australia for some time and then now working in Silicon Valley, what's the sort of perspective from Silicon Valley around this pivoting and adapting element? What have you felt?
Yeah, so obviously a lot of different businesses and types of companies have been affected, some very badly. In Silicon Valley, and with my focus being on the technology side, in tech companies we've been very lucky that really we can almost go unchanged almost entirely by being remote. You know, we work in front of computers all day, especially on the engineering side and the software side and the development side. We already use communication technologies like Slack, even when we're sitting side by side next to each other. As Gabi mentioned, we already used WebEx and some kind of online platform for sales and marketing. So for us, it's been not as big of a transition in general because we're already all familiar with these tools. But of course, it still requires some differences. You know, coming from a startup kind of world, we had startups which had, you know, offices which had free food, you know, gyms, even haircuts, if you like, at some of the very big companies. So a lot of different perks. There was a lot of investment in having fancy offices and a lot of facilities. And now all of a sudden, you know, it's kind of a little bit on the opposite side where people are working from home and will have to cook and do kind of the normal things. But from a working kind of perspective, it hasn't changed a huge amount. It clearly, not being in person, removes some of the advantages that we have in Silicon Valley, and one of those is kind of these chance meetings that we have. Now, at a startup, usually these meetings wouldn't be as much internal because because it's most smaller companies, we all know what everyone is doing. So it may not be like a large company where you might bump into someone and you might discover they're working on something you didn't know about, and you could be sharing resources or both working on the same thing. But from the startup's point of view, and especially in Silicon Valley, these chance meetings are primarily external. So I might be walking down the street, or, you know, someone might be visiting our office space or building, and they might see my t-shirt and ask me, hey, I've seen this logo. What do you guys do? Or someone might overhear you talking about something. And these chance meetings are really a big part of what makes Silicon Valley work. So right now we're seeing a lot of those kind of disappear because we're all working remotely from home. So that's kind of some of the big changes, I think, that we see on how we operate as startups. On the other side, though, in terms of the business side, well, we've seen even, you know, somewhat successful startups let go of people, reduce salaries. Many of them have really started to decide or optimize their spending. So many have cut their marketing budgets. There are tech startups and platforms that still require a strong physical presence. You know, the ride-sharing companies, travel type of companies. So some of those got hit very hard, and even though they have a tech component or you know, tech startups are not really physical type of premises, or at least they don't own those premises, they got hurt quite badly, and there was a lot of uncertainty. So we saw a lot of startups also reducing a lot of their spending to only focus on their core. And then from our point of view as a company, though, it's kind of interesting that Gabi mentioned the workplace monitoring. So at Navisens, you know, we focus on building a location platform. And that location platform works both indoors and outdoors. And some of our big indoor applications prior to COVID or prior to any of the current situation were tracking, you know, or guiding, you know, customers in shopping malls, managing workplaces, seeing what the utilization of workplaces was. We have customers that are very large corporations that may have thousands of employees, and they have so many campuses that trying to find a meeting room or trying to navigate on an unfamiliar campus is a problem. So we've already had these type of applications. Now what we're seeing is an adaptation of either existing customers' applications or new customers wanting to know how can they manage their workforce once they slowly start rolling in people. You know, should they bring everyone in? Should they alternate days? If someone is infected or sick, how can they do some type of contact tracing to understand how long that person spent next to other people or in what rooms? So for us, although there is uncertainty, just like for all companies, we've actually had a stronger uptick in sales and engagement, both from corporations wanting to manage workforces and also governments. And we have some government customers that would like to track or at least understand the status of some of their healthcare workers who are working at high-risk areas. So in some ways, it's been a bit of a balance in terms of the customer relationships that we have, but in some, you know, extension of our previous opportunities.
That's great. Thank you for that, Ash. That's fantastic. I really appreciate that. I think that first question sets the scene for us, because it's going to be one of those long-term emergence out of this COVID situation. How we pivot and adapt is going to keep changing even after this initial period, where in Australia, for example, the restrictions have eased, but in some other countries such as US and not so much, and in Israel, second wave potentially. But sort of focusing on the technology a little bit, I just wanted to turn to you, Gabi. As I mentioned in the introduction, I mentioned blockchain, and I wanted to shift to that technology because my understanding is that there's a lot to be sort of said in this re-emergence from our current situation and a promising future. Because in the past, blockchain has been touted as a technology by some as a technology that is looking for a problem. So the question is it still the case post-COVID, or will we be seeing more applications for blockchain as businesses reinvent themselves?
Yeah, thanks. Good question. And indeed, first of all, it is starting, and we see much more uptake and more opportunities in where we really need blockchain, or what kind of opportunities would benefit from blockchain. But you're correct. It's like many buzzwords. Initially, it created a hype, and like a hammer looking for nails, everything seemed to be solvable by blockchain. But of course, it's an overkill. Not everything is blockchain. I think now it's becoming much more clear, certainly to us, the technology providers, but also to our customers. And I think if I step back and look, what are the major technologies that change our industry? They are primarily around cloud AI. These are really the fundamental things that change. And if I take the AI, which is really the application part, the digital transformation enabler, what really blockchain allows us is to take the AI out of within the enterprise across enterprises. I mean, so far what we have done, we were providing technologies and we were building models and we were understanding data that resides within our own organization. It all belonged to us. It's interesting when we have these business networks, some of them already exist, maybe without the technology, and we just did things manually or semi-automatically, that now, once we apply blockchain and we marry that with the additional data that these networks continuously grow and have more and more data, we suddenly can get insights of that data across multiple enterprises. And that's invaluable for all of the participants in the network. I'll give some examples. But before I do so, it's not so straightforward. There is always new challenges coming in, things that we didn't have to do when we were in one enterprise. And that's primarily around the privacy and the confidentiality of the information. Because the information belongs to one company or the information belongs to multiple companies. And only when they share that information together, we can gain some new knowledge, some new insight, while each of them wants to preserve the privacy, the confidentiality of the information. So the challenge is how to bring those insights and overcome the fact that we need to keep privacy. So we've, in academia, played around for some years now with multiple technologies. Homomorphic encryption, which allows us really to encrypt things and still do some compute on it. Zero knowledge proof techniques, in which we don't really disclose information, only some properties about it. So there are multiple techniques that we need to bring into the same framework to allow this kind of AI. So some of you know, I'll give some examples about the networks we have in IBM, such as Food Trust. You know, it provides the provenance, allows you to track from where the product arrived, which farm it came, if it's a vegetable, or manufacturer, or was this produced, if it is something that was manufactured. But one of the problems we have in the world is waste. We throw away huge amounts of food while millions of people starve, unfortunately. And if we could optimize the supply chain between manufacturers, resellers, and retailers, we could avoid huge amounts of waste. But again, the challenge is, in order to create that optimal supply chain, we need that knowledge, and they are not so willing to share that. So what we're looking at is how we can, from one end, preserve the privacy, but still optimize those supply chains. Another example is the freshness of food. You know, when the food travels through multiple hops, keep the freshness. The life shelf of that fruit may change if it was exposed to extreme temperatures, sometimes not so high. Or that tomato that traveled from a farm and had different places where it was stored at different temperature. One of the nice things we can do is actually we change the target of where we are shipping that tomato through the supply chain. If the life shelf suddenly reduced and it's maybe not so good to put it in a retail store anymore, we may ship it to create some cans or some juice out of it or whatever. So adding AI into the blockchain can create many of these benefits. I would say also that you know, we can bring this to the COVID era, and there are multiple examples of where I've mentioned Mipasa, it's a partnership that we are doing. One of the areas, okay, we want to come back to work or we want to go back to travel. How do we prove our health status? So one of the challenges, there are multiple regulations, multiple different requirements. I can bring a paper from my doctor to show some evidence about my health status. Maybe I did a medical check and I was noticed that I'm negative. Maybe it was a week ago, and so on and so forth. So what we developed is something called a health passport, a digital passport, in which once you go to do, for instance, a check, or you go and visit a doctor and you get some input from the doctor or the hospital, we create a digital certificate. It could be like a code that you can carry on your smartphone or even on a paper. And with that, you can come and show for anyone who wants to verify your health. So for instance, today, when I enter a mall in Israel, they just measure my body temperature. Of course, that's not enough because my temperature might be down and I don't have the symptom, but I'm still can carry the disease. So with this certificate, from one end, I preserve my privacy because I don't have to disclose all my medical history or anything unrelated, but I can very precisely show them when I was tested, maybe I'm already immune, and the organization that wants to check, it could be the airline company, it could be the border control, it could be my employer, can validate that this certificate is authentic. It is using cryptographic means to encrypt it, and we keep on the blockchain the signature of the originator, let's say a test lab who did the test. And we can authenticate and make sure that it was indeed done by a lab that is certified by the government of Australia or Israel or US or whatever other place we live in. So we can close the loop and make sure that nobody can create false. And we've just seen, actually yesterday, an article where people were coming up with false test results to get on an airplane to go, I don't know where they were planning to go, I guess they were trying to get home. So it already happens. So with something like health passport, we certainly can keep the privacy, but allow people to go back to normal life as much as possible. Just real quickly, another example, I mentioned the supplier scenario. So we did have a network called Trust Your Supplier, a very general purpose network. We repurposed that and created a network for the healthcare domain called Rapid. And all of the major companies, providers, suppliers in the US are participating in that network so that hospitals and any healthcare providers can very quickly, effectively find out if a supplier is adhering to all the standards they need to adhere, what are their, how much they have in stock, what are their inventories, and so on and so forth. So that's another example using blockchain. Let me pause here.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Gabi. That's really helpful. There's a lot of buzz on the chat talking about blockchain. It's certainly, as you said earlier, buzzword, but it's you know, it's potentially, with the examples you've provided, will take off, and certainly in this post-COVID world. Just changing gears a little bit and turning to you, Ash. You know, we've hearing from Gabi around his perspectives from big company side, IBM side. Now, in your case, you've started a company, Navisens. It's your startup. And it was built on your PhD research from UTS. I wanted to know, what was the reason that you decided to take this technology to Silicon Valley?
Yeah, that's a question I get asked very often by people from outside of Silicon Valley and especially Australia as well. And there's probably, so many articles and things written about it. But it's actually something that once you experience and you live here, all of it kind of makes sense. So first of all, after my PhD or during my PhD and even before in my undergrad, I always really wanted to start a company, or I kind of felt that I would start a company. And during my PhD, I focused on the robotics side and really locked down on the location side. And one of my big inspirations was GPS. And I really wanted to have a technology that would have the same impact and would be as ubiquitous as GPS. So thinking about all of that, when you really look at where all the major technology companies are, where you hear about all the news of the source of technologies, where, the companies that get started become famous, you hear about them, from that perspective, kind of everything leads to Silicon Valley, and from a business perspective, I would have think, which would be the companies that we would partner with? Who would be licensing our technology? Who would be a company that could integrate our technology into their product? And even going further, as an outcome, where would you list on the stock exchange if you're going to become a public company? If you're going to get acquired, which companies would probably acquire you? When you start looking at all of that, it really makes sense to be in the region that really has a very high congregation of those types of opportunities. And to extend from that, Silicon Valley has a reputation for being very network centric, for having a very powerful network, and it absolutely is. When you come here, it's kind of a matter of having a very high concentration of people that have the same interest, right? And one way of looking at that is, the other perspective is you might say that's boring. Everyone kind of has the same interest. But on the opportunity side, what that means is anyone you meet or talk to, you can strike up a conversation, and there's some relation that you both, either something you've both gone through, technology that you've both used, a technology that you've both worked on. And not only that, it's also has a very strong network where people have been there and done that, right, in various experiences, and they actually want to open up those opportunities for other people. It's a very collaborative environment, and it also has this energy where, if you have an idea or something that no one thinks is possible, instead of asking why, they would ask, can I join you? Or can I help you along this way? Or they'll say, look, I have another friend who actually did something similar. Let me introduce you to him or her, right? So there's that side. And there's always the side of also funding opportunities that come up, or at least in this conversation, people always ask me about that. That is a part of it. It's not the most important thing, but naturally, if there's those opportunities to really build a company, along that also comes the opportunities to fund that company in a way that, isn't risk averse, that we may have in other places like Australia also. In Australia, if you have a very high risky venture, which, we can't hide the fact that basically any startup is generally very high risk. When you have those types of requirements for a very high appetite for risk, in my experience, or at least from my time here, there's nothing that has come close to me here. And one of the big reasons why is that people who have had those wins still remain in the area. And we may touch upon this a bit, in maybe some of the other questions about Australia and Israel, but in Australia, you can't just go walking in Sydney and go to a bar or a restaurant or just walking down the street and meet dozens of people who have either been at a company that got acquired, or been at a company that's a public company, or knows a friend who has been, or their partner or significant other, and they all remain in that same area. So that high concentration is unmatched, and it's very difficult to replicate without building that concentration of people and having them remain in the area. So kind of all of those, when you put those together, become a very powerful driving force. And even though I talk about them now and you might read about them, once you actually come here, you'll suddenly you'll be surprised at how much effort it has. The one thing that it made me remember is I remember all those days that I have really late nights, either studying or during my PhD. And if I'd tell people what I was doing, it wouldn't resonate with many people. Over here, it's the actual opposite. And I'm not saying every single person is like this, but I would have already met many people doing the same thing when I was at university. They weren't just studying late for exams. They were trying to build something, and they had a vision of what they really wanted to build. And it's really a very different scene here. So that's kind of some of the stuff that made me move here, and also now in hindsight that I can talk about how powerful it is.
That's great, Ash. I really appreciate that perspective from Silicon Valley. We've actually got to the point of the afternoon, believe it or not, that we've already entered into the broader Q&A, which because I do want to leave some time for questions. We've actually hit exactly the time for that. So perhaps some of the other things we were going to talk about, Gabi and Ash, we might cover in some of these questions that I'm receiving from the audience. So I might just, if it's okay with you, I might just scroll down that list and sort of go down those that I'm seeing in the chat. So I really thank everyone who's being really active on the chat and putting lots of stuff. And I also see Gabi's already responding to some of the questions. So I'm going to try and find ones that are sort of novel. So someone asked, where is the technology of using supercomputers, nanotech in satellites at UTS and Israel? So I suppose that's a bit of an, I'm happy to answer as the UTS person here, our perspective. I mean, but then I might open it to Ash and Gabi just to say some words about Silicon Valley and Israel's perspective on satellites. So at UTS, to answer that question, we're actually doing two main areas. One is we're looking at satellite communications. So we have research in satellite communications, design of antennas, security for that, mobile satellites, and that actually requires quite a lot of different elements coming together. Experts in telecommunications engineering, experts in data science, in even in then looking at materials and things like that. But certainly testing in RF chambers. There's a lot of elements to creating really good and secure comms, particularly in space. The other area we look at is digital image processing. So we look at a lot of remote sensing technologies, which we create at UTS, and that's to analyze digital imagery from satellites. And of course, that takes a lot of supercomputing and data science and AI power to particularly process those images and extract the information from there. So Gabi and Ashod, did you want to comment anything about technology that either you personally or that you know of that is happening at your locations in either Israel or Silicon Valley?
Not in particular, I think. I mean, you covered many of the topics I know are also been looked at in Israel, certainly. I know maybe one additional emphasis in Israel is in the satellite industry is on miniaturizing things and being able to build more, I would say, economically smaller satellites that still provide high bandwidth of communication or other things. So there are some interesting projects in that space, including even how to push more of our cloud capabilities into space at one point in time. But that's really much more advanced.
I don't really have anything major to add to that. I was just going to say, I mean, other than, in the US or Silicon Valley, well, it's really based in LA, but SpaceX comes to mind as the company that probably everyone would think of in the US, and they recently had the manned spacecraft launch. But other than that, I don't have anything to add to that.
I might just go to the next question then, and that is around, there was a lot of questions around 5G, believe it or not, because, there was some mention of 5G. So one of the questioners talks about, is it a new generation or is it only an expansion of wavelengths of 4G or 4G plus? And also there were some questions around the safety of 5G as well. So who would like to tackle that question around 5G?
I'm happy to say a few words. It is an area we do have activities in Israel and in IBM. So it is certainly a new generation. It's a new way of deploying the infrastructure. I know there are some concerns, but actually it's on the contrary. The antennas will be closer to us. Once the antennas are closer to us, the transmission from our cellular phone that's required, I mean the power consumption and the power to get to a closer antenna is smaller, so the radiation is smaller. I think the interesting thing in the deployment of 5G is that all of the telco will need to develop new, smaller, mini data centers that are regional within the city. That's the way the infrastructure of 5G works. That would allow them, to one end, to move their own infrastructure to cloud native. Until now, they were hooked by the NAPs, the network equipment suppliers, to some special hardware software. Now they will be able to have a more open infrastructure that's cloud native. The other benefit would be that now they will be able to compete against the cloud providers. So if you think, and again, taking a step back, one of the changes in the world is also decentralization and decentralization of cloud. So far, IBM, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, all of them, we have our own data center, big data centers that are located in several places in the world. With the move for 5G, we can push these cloud capabilities to the edge into these mini data centers and allow for companies to run their workloads much closer to the data. So in some cases, the main issue is latency. So now you can reduce the latency to about a millisecond or below, whereas now it is in the 10 of milliseconds until you reach the data center. Certainly very crucial for all of the online gaming, augmented reality base and so on, but also for many businesses that want to have a resilient network that's close. The other interesting thing is that we can push now AI to the edge. So there's no longer the need to push all of the data to the cloud. I mean, it seems that it's easy to push it to cloud, but it's pretty expensive. Of course, it introduces some new and interesting challenges, because now I have an AI model that's running maybe on hundreds or thousands of edge devices or edges. Each of them, I could actually update those models over time based on the new data that I get. And now I have a challenge, okay, how do I reconcile all of those changes into the main model I have maybe in my big cloud, and then push back the updates and which changes do I take? So now it allows me to actually decentralize the way I run AI models as well. I think this move of 5G beyond the infrastructure of telco, it really allows us this whole decentralization, push to edge.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Gabi. I've got a question here for Ash specifically. You know, it asks about, do you see an increase of robotics activities in Silicon Valley due to COVID? And do you have any plans to enter into general robotics?
Okay. Well, so firstly, one part of an answer for that, I think, which relates to the COVID one, is pre-COVID. You know, so doing my undergrad at UTS in Sydney and then my PhD with a focus in robotics, you know, we worked on all kinds of things, you know, whether it was, you know, healthcare devices like autonomous wheelchairs, unmanned air vehicles. You know, I even spent time at UC Berkeley with the UTS team, or our team from UTS, working on the DARPA Urban Challenge, you know, the very early autonomous vehicles races. So we have a very rich robotics background in Australia. But when I came here, I was actually surprised, and this is the non-COVID answer, I was surprised how much of the robotics type of applications we worked on at UTS were actually startups and tech companies here. Autonomous vehicles would be the simplest case. There's dozens of autonomous vehicles companies you can think of, whether it's retrofitting sensors to an existing vehicle, modifying an existing vehicle, or completely creating a new vehicle from scratch. You know, and that somewhat surprised me, because all of that stuff we were all doing at UTS, you know, very, very early in the days. And a lot of the pioneers that were doing the same thing except in Silicon Valley, all got involved with building companies. Now, kind of related to that, one of the things that I've seen kind of during COVID, or become a bit more popular during COVID, is these very small delivery bots. And I don't know if you guys have seen them, but there's these companies that have small bots. They can probably deliver a pizza or some takeout food. Now, they did ban them in some cities. I guess they were just roaming around, maybe not tested too well, and blocking footpaths and various things. But some cities actually, embrace them and have it as a way of doing, a contactless, you pay online, there's no exchange of money, you press a button, the lid opens, and maybe the robot is sterilized between every run. So I've definitely seen an increase of that. And one of the other things is there were huge increases in spikes of any of these type of what we call last mile companies that are specifically involved in delivery of goods. So Instacart, Amazon Fresh, and all of these, delivery companies that specialize in groceries especially. Some of them couldn't hire enough people. And although some of those aren't necessarily robotics type of companies, a few started to have these mobile robots, but other ones really deal with all kinds of optimization problems that we deal with in robotics. How to prioritize deliveries, how to route optimal paths between delivery drivers, and how to manage, time to pick up food and deliver food and so on. So that's definitely one of the things that I've seen on the robotics side that has, had a bit of an uptick or at least a stronger interest due to COVID. And possibly the other thing that they say that people believe is, what will happen post-COVID? Will we still continue doing this online delivery of goods, or will we start to go back to grocery stores? That I can't answer yet.
Thanks,
Just
Ash.
to quickly add on top.
Sure, go ahead.
One of the projects we had in the research lab was to use autonomous flying of drones for inspection purposes. So we've been working on that for several years. There are multiple civil infrastructure, think about bridges, cell towers, so on and so forth, that you need to inspect on a monthly, weekly basis, very dangerous and so on. And we decided to go with these specialized drones that can fly autonomously to handle those kind of situations. But as Ashod said, in the last few months, there is a huge interest now coming to IBM of starting to use drones all over for delivery of not goods, because they know we are not in that business, but certainly for many other scenarios, because people want to use them for multiple of the things. Of course, regulation is not there yet in most of the countries, but I think we are going to get there, and we'll see not only robotics on the ground, but drones in the air. So it will be multitude of these autonomous things, I would say, robots and drones that will help us out.
That leads me a little bit to one of the next questions, sort of definitely a segue, but we're talking about the evolution of awesome technologies, drones, robotics. There's also some apprehension about the growth of technology post and during COVID. Some people are worried about, for example, privacy and security. So there's a question here that says, we know that the secret intelligence in Israel has permission to follow citizens to monitor COVID cases. I suppose it could be to Gabi, this question. What's your thoughts from a privacy and security perspective on that?
Yeah, so we've, one of the projects I did not mention that we kicked off was really how to solve the issue or the problem of contact tracing, of really the basic questions. Who have you been in proximity with? When? So that if unfortunately somebody of those people was identified positive, we can at least suggest you to take a test. And we've talked with multiple governments across the world. All of them are looking and are deploying a solution one way or another. Of course, companies, large organizations, including IBM and many other enterprises, are looking for a solution before they allow their employees to come back, because they want to prevent the pandemic to spread in a department, and then suddenly they need to send home a whole department. Have you as some of you have seen, Google and Microsoft came together, Google and Apple came together to create this SDK. And there are also multiple other solutions that allows you to build a solution in which you can actually trace who have you been in proximity with in an anonymous way. And we don't keep any of that information in the cloud or in any other place. Everything is kept on your phone. And each and every day, you just get a new feed that was approved by the government, let's say, of those unique codes. Again, not names, not location, nothing, of people that were identified with just the ID. You can press a button on your cell phone, compare yourself against those, and only you are notified if you have been in close proximity to somebody like that was unfortunately identified as positive. And of course, at that point, we would recommend to take action, go and take a check and so on. But nothing is exposed to anyone beside yourself. You are doing all of those checks. And this is, of course, very interesting, of course, to many companies and countries to deploy. I would say on the technology side, though, the Google Apple solution is nice as a beginning. It uses the Bluetooth. But as some of you know, Bluetooth is not precise enough. I mean, I may sit here in this room. You may sit in the next room. Bluetooth penetrates also walls. And if unfortunately you are sick, I will get a notification I was in close proximity. So that's not enough. We are looking, so actually with MIT together, about technology sales using the ultrasonic capabilities we have in phones, which has the ability to be much more precise up to the meter and below that, also the direction, and combining several technologies to be very, very precise, because otherwise with all of the false positives that Bluetooth brings, it's not, I mean, you put too many people in quarantine at home. But it's definitely solvable without compromising any privacy.
Thanks,
and I think most of the world would go into that direction.
Go on, Ashod.
Yeah, I was going to say I can probably touch a little bit on that because, I mean, of course, our focus is all on location at Navisens. And Gabi already mentioned a couple of things even earlier when he was talking about, you know, edge computing or AI on the edge as opposed to on the server side. So the interesting thing is that Navisens, actually, all of our compute is done on the client device, so on the smartphone. There's various reasons for that. You know, primarily we use the motion sensors in the phone. That's the accelerometers and the gyroscopes. And because those devices are on the phone, it just makes sense to not transmit all of that data, calculate, and then transmit the result back. And we use a lot of robotics estimation type of algorithms, which generally require a very closed type of feedback loop while they're operating. But the advantage of that is, by design, everything is done on the client side, so on the user's device, which means unless the app that uses our technology wants to publicize that information, we won't know and no one else knows. And that's actually one of the unique points of Navisens that we often get, you know, a lot of positive kind of affirmation on from customers, because their worry is, of course, you know, if you use, you know, Google's or Apple's location system, it might be, you know, scanning Wi-Fi access points, sending it to their servers, storing that for future people, you know, so there's always some kind of fingerprint that's left behind, or trail. And that worries, of course, if it's a corporation or a government using your technology. And we have governments that use ours and corporations that use ours, that one of the big selling points is we even work when they're in airplane mode. And we guarantee that by design, we can't actually know what they're doing with our technology. So that's been a strong point on the privacy side, which we've seen more of an interest now in terms of, you know, can we provide a solution? And we actually have created a bunch of, you know, extensions to our SDK to provide more statistical information. So you can easily just query and say, how much time has this person been indoors versus outdoors? You know, and some extra features that just make it easy to customers to try and understand the risk profile, but purely without us knowing anything and no one else knowing anything. It's all on the device.
Thanks, Ash, and that's really interesting. Get that two perspectives from both Gabi and you know, in the IBM element, and obviously the smaller you know, startups perspective. Ash, particularly, I think now privacy, data privacy, it's a big topic as technology emerges. Now, with that, I'm going to have to, unfortunately, come to the close of this Q&A session. I can't believe an hour has gone so quickly. It has been absolute pleasure speaking to you, Gabi and Ashod. You've been fantastic, and the questions, we couldn't get through them all, but they keep coming. It just shows how interested people are in this topic. So I just want to thank you both for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to say a quick note. I think there were some questions that also were tagged at me, but because I'm on an iPad and you know, paying attention to everything, I can't reply back. I was going to say anyone can feel free to send me a message either on LinkedIn or my email is ashod@navisens.com if there was something that they wanted me specifically to answer and I couldn't answer.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Ashod.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you,
Thanks
Gabi.
for having us, and be happy again also to follow up on LinkedIn or by any other means.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks both. I really appreciate your time, and I'd like to now hand over to Ori to wrap things up. Thanks again.
Thank you, Michael, Gabi, and Ashod. I'm sure we could have gone for another hour easily. It was very, very interesting. We appreciate your time, and I really want to ask you about your backgrounds as well. But I mean, backgrounds on Zoom, not professionally. But I'm conscious that that we are supposed to wrap up. So I'll just say, Ashod, you win with the background, of course, today. But first, I wanted to thank our ambassador for being with us today, Mark Sofer, and the team at the embassy for their support. Thank UTS and Professor Blumenstein for this partnership, which I'm sure will just grow from strength to strength. Gabi and Ashod for an incredible insight and invigorating discussion. Thank you very much. We encourage you all to follow UTS and Technion Australia on social media to make sure you know about future events and other opportunities. Speaking of which, we've got two exciting events coming up. On the 7th of July with the Deputy Director of Rambam Hospital in Israel, which Dr. Yael Shachor, and she's going to talk about Israel's preparedness to second wave of COVID-19, which unfortunately seems like it's heading that way, and what Australia can learn from it. And the week following that, on the 16th of July, we're hosting Professor Aaron Shechanover, who is actually Israel's first Nobel Prize laureate in science, 1 out of 8. And he's going to talk about the future of medicine, Israel's unique entrepreneurial culture, and his journey into winning a Nobel Prize. So we're going to send you an email and encourage you to connect with UTS 230,000 alumni members, as well as with the Technion network. And you know, usually I would end up by inviting Gabi to come and visit us here in Australia. You're obviously invited, but we might have to wait a little bit. And similarly, any of our guests from Israel are very welcome. The last thing I'll mention is that once we finish this Zoom, you will receive an automated sort of survey. Really help us if you can answer very quick 3-4 questions, just so we can improve our future activities. So that's all from us. Thank you very much. Until next time, take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.